If a man cheats, people say it's biology. If a woman cheats, people say she's immoral, she's finished, same action, same betrayal. Very different judgment. So the real question isn't who cheated. The real question is why society forgives one and crucifies the other. Let's talk about it. When infidelity happens, the reaction is rarely about the act alone. It is filtered through gender, expectation, and long-standing social bias. A man's betrayal is often explained, contextualized, softened. A woman's betrayal is interrogated, moralized, and remembered. The same behavior is judged through two entirely different moral lenses, and those lenses have been shaped by generations of conditioning. Society does not respond to cheating as a breach of trust first. It responds to who violated the script it had already written for them. For men, infidelity is frequently framed as external and impulsive. Language like temptation, weak moment, or natural urge quietly shifts responsibility away from character and towards circumstance. The narrative suggests that desire overtook reason, that biology overpowered intention. Even outrage tends to be temporary because the underlying belief remains that men are expected to struggle with fidelity. The bar is set lower, not because the damage is smaller, but because the expectation was never that high to begin with. Forgiveness is encouraged quickly, sometimes even portrayed as maturity or emotional intelligence on the partner's part. For women, the framing is entirely different. Cheating is not treated as a momentary lapse, but as a revelation of who she truly is. The language changes from behavior to identity, disloyal, immoral, untrustworthy. Her entire past is questioned, her future relationships preemptively judged. Where a man is seen as having done something wrong, a woman is seen as being something wrong. The act becomes proof of flawed values rather than a poor decision, and redemption is rarely part of the cultural imagination. This double standard is rooted in how loyalty has been gendered. Historically, a woman's faithfulness was tied to honor, lineage, and social stability, while a man's faithfulness was treated as desirable but not essential. That imbalance still lingers, even in modern conversations that claim to value equality. Male sexuality is framed as expansive and uncontrollable, female sexuality as selective and symbolic. When a woman cheats, it disrupts not just a relationship, but the expectation that her desire should be contained, predictable, and owned by one partner. There is also a difference in how pain is validated. Men who are cheated on are often supported in their anger, their sense of humiliation, their wounded pride. Women who are cheated on are frequently advised to be understanding, to communicate better, to consider what they might have done differently. When the roles reverse, empathy reverses with them. The cheating man is analyzed, the cheating woman is condemned. One is a topic of discussion, the other a verdict. These double standards persist because they protect familiar power dynamics. Excusing male infidelity preserves male autonomy, while punishing female infidelity reinforces control over female choice. Calling one biology and the other unforgivable is not about science or morality. It is about maintaining a hierarchy of expectations where accountability is unevenly distributed and desire is judged not by its impact, but by the gender of the person who expressed it. When infidelity is explained through biology, it often sounds scientific, neutral, even compassionate. Phrases like men are wired this way or it's evolutionary give the impression that cheating is a reflex rather than a decision. Biology becomes a convenient shield, turning a breach of trust into an inevitability. But the selective way this argument is applied reveals its real purpose. Biology is only invoked when it reduces accountability, and almost always when it benefits men. When the same behavior appears in women, biology suddenly loses relevance and morality takes center stage. Desire exists in all humans, yet only one group is repeatedly told that their desire excuses their actions. If biology truly dictated behavior, self-control would be an illusion and commitment would be unrealistic. Society would not celebrate loyalty, discipline, or restraint if they were biologically impossible. The truth is that biology creates impulses, not outcomes. It explains attraction, not betrayal. The moment someone crosses a boundary, hides the truth, and chooses secrecy, biology has already been replaced by intention. The accountability gap becomes obvious in how consequences are distributed. When a man cheats, the conversation often focuses on whether his needs were met, whether the relationship was lacking, whether temptation was unusually strong. The spotlight turns outward, scanning for justifications. When a woman cheats, the spotlight turns inward, dissecting her values, her integrity, her worthiness as a partner. Biology is not considered a factor because the expectation is not about impulse, but about control. She is expected to manage desire flawlessly, while he is expected to struggle with it. This framing quietly lowers the moral standard for one and raises it for the other. Men are taught that resisting temptation is difficult and therefore impressive when achieved, while women are taught that resisting temptation is mandatory and therefore unremarkable. When a man remains faithful, he is praised for discipline. When a woman remains faithful, she is simply fulfilling her role. Biology is used not to explain human behavior, but to excuse deviations from responsibility where responsibility was never strongly demanded. What is rarely acknowledged is that accountability is also a biological capacity. The ability to foresee consequences, regulate impulses, and act in alignment with values is just as natural to humans as desire itself. Choosing loyalty is not the absence of biology, it is the application of it. Reducing cheating to instinct strips people of agency while selectively preserving social privilege. It suggests that some people are governed by urges, while others are governed by morals, even though both experience the same internal conflicts. The biology argument also collapses under consistency. If male cheating is natural, then male jealousy should be equally natural and excusable. If desire overrides choice, then betrayal should be met with understanding on all sides. Yet society demands restraint from the injured party while excusing lack of restraint from the one who caused the injury. Biology is not being used as an explanation. It is being used as a narrative tool to redistribute blame away from those already granted more freedom and toward those already burdened with higher expectations. The outrage directed at female infidelity is rarely just about betrayal. It is about violation of control. For centuries, society has treated female sexuality not as a personal experience, but as a resource to be managed, protected, and owned. When a woman cheats, the reaction is disproportionate because it disrupts an unspoken agreement that her desire should exist within boundaries defined by others. Infidelity becomes threatening not only because of emotional harm, but because it challenges the expectation that a woman's sexuality must be predictable, contained, and accountable to social approval. From an early age, women are taught that their value is linked to sexual restraint. Modesty is praised, curiosity is policed, and desire is something to be monitored rather than understood. This conditioning does not disappear in adulthood, it simply becomes more sophisticated. Loyalty is framed as virtue, but only in one direction. A man's sexual history is often neutral or even celebrated, while a woman's is scrutinized for meaning. When she steps outside a committed relationship, the response is not just disappointment, but alarm, as if something fundamental has gone wrong. This is why female infidelity is treated as a moral collapse rather than a relational failure. The act is seen as evidence that she cannot be trusted with autonomy. Her choices are no longer viewed as situational, but as symptomatic of deeper flaws. Society asks not what happened in the relationship, but what kind of woman she is. The language used is revealing, loose, uncontrolled, disrespectful. These words are less about the act itself and more about reasserting boundaries around female desire. Control over female sexuality also explains why forgiveness is harder to access. A man who cheats is often encouraged to return, repair, and recommit. A woman who cheats is often advised to accept permanent suspicion or exclusion. Trust, once broken, is treated as irreparable because the issue is not just trust in the relationship, but trust in her ability to regulate herself. The fear is not repetition of the act, but loss of control over something that was never fully accepted as hers to begin with. This dynamic is reinforced by cultural narratives that frame male desire as spontaneous and female desire as reactive. Women are expected to want sex only in response to emotional safety and commitment. So when they seek it elsewhere, it disrupts the story. It forces acknowledgement that female desire can be independent, intentional, and self-directed. That acknowledgement is uncomfortable for systems built on supervision and permission, so it is resisted through shame rather than examined through empathy. Even discussions that claim to be progressive often carry this bias. Female empowerment is praised until it includes sexual agency without approval. The moment a woman's choices challenge loyalty expectations, empowerment is rebranded as recklessness. Infidelity becomes the line where autonomy is withdrawn. The punishment is not only social judgment, but the reassertion of control through labels, isolation, and moral hierarchy. What is ultimately being defended is not the sanctity of relationships, but the belief that a woman's sexuality must always answer to someone else. Male reactions to infidelity are often described as heartbreak or betrayal, but beneath those emotions lies something more complex and less examined, a sense of ownership. In many cultures, relationships are unconsciously framed in terms of possession, where a partner's loyalty is intertwined with status, pride, and identity. When a woman cheats, it is not only perceived as emotional loss, but as a public violation of territory. The pain is amplified by the belief that something that belonged exclusively to him has been accessed by someone else. This mindset does not always present itself as overt control. It often disguises itself as protection, provision, or commitment. A man may believe he has earned exclusivity through effort, sacrifice, or loyalty, and when that exclusivity is broken, the ego experiences it as theft rather than disappointment. The language used in these moments reveals the framing: she was mine, I was replaced, I was disrespected. These are not expressions of mutual loss. They are expressions of damaged ownership and diminished rank. Male ego is deeply tied to comparison. Infidelity triggers an internal hierarchy where another man becomes a rival, and the question is not simply why she left, but how he measures up. Sexual betrayal becomes a referendum on masculinity, competence, and worth. This is why anger often outweighs grief. The act is experienced less as abandonment and more as humiliation, especially in social contexts where male status is reinforced through perceived control over one's partner. This ego response is culturally validated. Men are often encouraged to view jealousy as evidence of love and possessiveness as passion. Rage is normalized, even romanticized, while vulnerability is sidelined. When a woman cheats, the expectation is that a man's pride has been injured beyond repair, and his reaction is framed as understandable, even inevitable. The focus shifts away from the relational dynamics and toward restoring his sense of dominance or self-respect. The ownership mindset also explains why male infidelity is judged differently. When a man cheats, it does not usually threaten his partner's social standing in the same way. His status remains intact because he is not perceived as someone who was owned in the first place. A woman's cheating, however, is seen as stripping her partner of control, which society treats as a more serious offense than emotional betrayal. The injury is not just personal, it is symbolic. This framework makes healing difficult because it prioritizes ego repair over emotional understanding. Instead of asking what was missing, what boundaries failed, or what communication broke down, the narrative centers on reclaiming dignity. Forgiveness becomes a question of pride rather than possibility. Reconciliation feels like weakness if ownership has been challenged, and separation feels like justice if dominance can be reasserted through rejection. As long as relationships are unconsciously measured in terms of possession, infidelity will continue to provoke reactions rooted more in wounded identity than in mutual accountability. The pain is real, but its interpretation is shaped by a mindset that confuses exclusivity with ownership and love with control. Infidelity is often defended as a moment where instinct took over, as if desire suddenly erased intention and removed the ability to choose. This framing is appealing because it reduces guilt and softens judgment, turning a conscious action into an automatic response. But instinct does not operate in isolation. Humans experience attraction constantly without acting on it. The difference between noticing desire and crossing a boundary is not instinct, it is choice. Cheating does not begin with attraction, it begins with permission. Instinct explains impulses, not sequences. Infidelity is rarely a single, uncontrollable moment. It is a chain of decisions, continuing the conversation, seeking privacy, hiding messages, creating opportunities, lying afterward. Each step requires awareness and intent. Calling this process instinctual ignores the cognitive effort involved in deception. The body may feel something instantly, but the mind collaborates long before betrayal occurs. The instinct argument also collapses when examined for consistency. If instincts justify infidelity, then instincts should also justify jealousy, anger, and retaliation. Yet society demands emotional regulation from those who are betrayed, while excusing lack of regulation from those who betray. One person's impulses are framed as natural, while the others are framed as something to control. This selective tolerance exposes that instinct is not the real issue. Accountability is. Choice is what differentiates desire from action. Adults navigate countless impulses daily without acting on them because they understand consequences. Commitment is not the absence of attraction. It is the decision to honor boundaries despite attraction. When someone cheats, it is not because instinct overpowered morality, but because morality was deprioritized in favor of immediate gratification. The decision may be emotionally charged, but it is still a decision. Reducing cheating to instinct also strips relationships of meaning. If fidelity is merely the result of low temptation, then loyalty becomes accidental rather than intentional. But trust is built on the belief that a partner will choose the relationship even when alternatives exist. That belief cannot coexist with the idea that people are helpless in the face of desire. Commitment requires agency, and agency requires acknowledging choice. The instinct narrative is particularly harmful because it lowers expectations while preserving entitlement. It suggests that some people should not be held fully responsible for managing their impulses, while others are expected to do so flawlessly. This imbalance creates moral loopholes that excuse betrayal without addressing its impact. The emotional damage caused by infidelity is not instinctual. It is the result of deliberate secrecy and broken agreements. When instinct is used as an excuse, it shifts the conversation away from values. The question becomes, what happened to you, instead of what did you choose? This shift protects self-image at the cost of honesty. Growth requires confronting the reality that attraction is universal, but integrity is optional. The line between them is drawn by choice, not by biology. Real equality in relationships is often discussed as a concept, but rarely practiced as a standard. It is easy to claim fairness while quietly maintaining different expectations for different people. In the context of infidelity, equality does not mean pretending that emotions are identical or that betrayal feels the same to everyone. It means acknowledging that the moral weight of an action does not change based on gender. A breach of trust remains a breach of trust, regardless of who commits it. Equality challenges the selective narratives that excuse one person while condemning another. When accountability is uneven, relationships become hierarchies rather than partnerships. One person is granted complexity, context, and second chances, while the other is reduced to a single mistake. This imbalance is often justified as realism, but it is rooted in tradition rather than truth. Real equality requires dismantling the idea that one partner's desire is more understandable or forgivable than the other's. In equitable relationships, responsibility is not outsourced to biology, stress, or circumstance. Both partners are expected to manage their impulses and communicate their dissatisfaction before boundaries are crossed. Equality does not erase differences in experience, but it demands consistency in standards. If loyalty is valued, it must be valued universally. If cheating is condemned, it must be condemned without qualification. Anything less turns morality into a negotiation rather than a principle. Real equality also reshapes how forgiveness is approached. Forgiveness should be a personal choice, not a gendered expectation. No one should be pressured to excuse betrayal for the sake of maturity, nor shamed for choosing to leave. Equality respects autonomy on both sides. It recognizes that staying and leaving are both valid responses when trust is broken, and that neither choice should be framed as weakness or virtue based on who was betrayed. Power dynamics often interfere with equality by framing one partner as the gatekeeper of commitment and the other as the risk. This framing creates a silent imbalance where one person's mistakes are absorbed and the others are magnified. Real equality removes that imbalance by centering mutual responsibility. It asks not who has more to lose socially, but who has failed to honor the agreement they willingly entered. Equality in relationships also demands emotional symmetry. Pain is not ranked, and betrayal is not measured by ego. The focus shifts from defending identity to understanding impact. Instead of protecting pride, the priority becomes repair, truth, or honest separation. This shift allows relationships to be evaluated on shared values rather than inherited assumptions. When equality is practiced, relationships become spaces of choice rather than obligation. Loyalty is meaningful because it is mutual, not enforced. Accountability is effective because it is expected from both sides. Trust becomes sustainable because it is built on fairness, not fear. Without equality, relationships rely on silence and tolerance. With it, they rely on respect and conscious commitment. At the heart of this conversation is not cheating, biology, or even gender. It is honesty. Honesty about the standards we apply, the excuses we accept, and the power dynamics we protect. Infidelity exposes the truth of a relationship, but it also exposes the truth of a society that judges the same behavior differently depending on who commits it.